Coming up in this episode, we're going to talk about Peter Attia's supplements list.
I don't think there's an evidence-based reason why I should take a baby aspirin.
Why do you think he's exactly taking it?
Again, I don't know the man, but it seems almost like...
All in all, I'm trying to get up to about a gram of total magnesium or elemental magnesium in my system a day.
So he takes a lot of magnesium, and so he's probably doing it for...
I take 2 grams of glycine. I take 600 milligrams of ashwagandha.
None of these would have recommended amount. You're on your own on this front.
And I take 5,000 IU of vitamin D.
What do you think might be the reason he consumes more than the recommended amount? Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Health Geeks podcast. In this episode, we have with us Dr. Naras Lapsys, and we're going to talk about Peter Attia's supplements list. Before that, just a quick update. 2 quick things. I just want to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Naras Lapsys. He's a dietitian at Chi Longevity in Singapore, as well as G3 Health, a sister company. Secondly, my team is launching a sports and healthy aging lab this year, and the easiest way to tell you about it is to hop on a piece of equipment that we are bringing in, do a maximum strength test, and this is a safer version of the 1 rep max test. After the test, through the report, I can see the difference in my force output between my left leg and my right leg. I can know my total force output and where it ranks among people my age, and I can know other data which can be useful if I were to plan my own training program. If you have plans to train for something this year, or just simply stay healthy, or if you are doing rehab, all these data will be useful for you. I just demonstrated with a piece of equipment, but there are over 100 tests out there, and we can walk you through customized set of tests. Another thing is with all this data, we can run challenges, and you can do it among your friends, your family, your peers, or you can be like me, where I'm going out to the street to get people to try out the test with a chance of winning $1,000. Now, if you're interested to find out more, please feel free to contact us. For now, back to the episode. Hi Naras, thanks for coming onto the show.
Great to see you.
To start off, let us first watch the video, and as our homework, we've actually done quite a bit of research, and we know after watching the video, it starts roughly at 55-second mark, where he talks about fish oil and EPA and DHA. Shall we just watch that part?
Yeah, let's watch that.
Okay.
I take EPA and DHA, so I take fish oil. Again, I'm happy to even state the brands that I take of these things because I don't have any affiliation with any of these companies. And frankly, I like to give a shout out to companies that I think sell good products. So I use Carlson's EPA and DHA. I can't remember exactly which one I take. I can never remember their names, but it is the highest EPA version that they have. So by taking 4 of these capsules a day, I'm taking roughly 2 grams of EPA a day and probably 1.5 grams of DHA. The reason I take that much is I'm treating to a dose. I'm treating to a red blood cell membrane concentration of EPA and DHA of about 12%. So that's a blood test you would do to, so there you go. You have a biomarker that I can use to say I'm taking too much, I'm taking too little, here you go.
So I think a few questions from there. First off, is it necessary to supplement EPA and DHA in the first place? Are we generally not consuming enough from our diet?
Yeah, so technically, you don't need to be supplementing if you're getting enough EPA and DHA from your diet. But there are lots of people who are not getting enough. And as Peter Attia has said here, this is one of the supplements, at least, that we have a biomarker for. So you can actually find out what your level is and then make a decision whether you're going to have it from food or whether you're going to do it from supplementation or food and supplements.
And from the very baseline, what is the dietary allowance or recommended allowance that we should consume?
Yeah, so the general consensus is if you're eating animal product, you should be having 2 serves of fish a week, and the sizing of that fish is roughly about palm to 3/4 hand sized, which is around 150 grams. So 300 grams of fish per week, and oily fish is best. Sardine, cod, tuna, bluefin tuna, for example. We can talk a little bit about if you're a plant consumer in a minute, but if you're consuming marine products, that's the best source for it. And interestingly, Singaporeans are quite good fish consumers. So I had a look at some data, and I think each Singaporean consumes on average about 16 kilograms of fish per year. It's up from what it used to be. And if you break that down to a weekly amount, it's about 300 grams. So as a population, unlike a lot of other populations, Singaporeans are already quite good on their omega-3 intake.
And if we were to go more specific, he mentions that he's treating to a dose, red blood cell membrane concentration of EPA and DHA of 12%, which you can do a blood test to find out what is this red blood cell membrane concentration.
This is a local show, so we're talking about Singapore. This is not a blood test that you can get by going to your local provider. So it's a finger prick test, which you do onto a piece of spotted fabric or paper, and it's a send-out test. And that send-out test shows you what all your fatty acids are on your red blood cells. And your red blood cell is meant to be indicative of most cells in the body. And that particular test, we can use the name, so it's called an omega quant test, will tell you what percentage of the red blood cell contains omega-3s, and there's quite a lot of research data on this, and you get a number which is called your omega-3 index, and then there's ranges. And so Attia likes his range to be up near 12%, and I think it's sort of from the 8 to 12 or 8 to 14% is considered optimal.
Yeah, actually that's related to our next question. Why does he aim for 12%? Is 12% considered normal? What's the range to aim for?
Yeah, so it's not normal. Attia is interested in optimizing, and I think, again, some of his horsemen of health conditions, he's very interested in preventing cognitive decline. And there's interesting research on omega-3s and brain health. And it's through that set of studies that I think he's kind of chosen arbitrarily 12% as being optimum for himself.
And how long do you need to take these supplements to show some results?
Yeah, so red blood cells have about a 3 or 4 month turnaround. And so even if you were doing a spot test, you have to wait at least 3 or 4 months before you retest anyway. And then it comes, as he said, it comes down to dose. And what dose do you need? A, for the health conditions that you're tracking for, and B, comparing how much you actually eat to how much you need to supplement. Then he mentioned, I think, that he was taking just shy of 3,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA combined per day.
On that note, and you mentioned earlier as well, the Singaporean taking amount of fish. Do some people need it more?
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, if you're not a fish consumer and not an oily fish consumer, the likelihood is that you may not be getting as much omega-3 as you need. And then, going down the line, if you're vegetarian or if you're vegan, then the need is going to be even more, because obtaining omega-3s from food only from plant is quite difficult. And you have to be quite a savvy vegetarian or vegan to do it. So those needs are even higher. Technically, you can still do it without supplementation, but you'd really need to concentrate heavily on the plant foods that contain it.
Good to know. This next question is actually from one of the comments from Attia's video.
Yeah.
Is iodine sensitivity something that people should take note of when consuming fish oil supplements?
So I had a bit of a look, and a sort of guidelines around fish oil consumption and how much iodine is in it is so negligible that for the vast majority it is of not any concern. And from the data that I looked at, even people with hypothyroidism, it's still not considered an issue. So I think maybe on an individual by individual basis, maybe yes, but as a blanket statement, no, it's not something that most people need to be concerned about.
Thank you for answering the questions. I think that's all we have. But anyway, if you guys have more questions on a particular supplement, please just put it in the comments and we'll get to you. We'll guide you to where you can find more answers later on in the video. For now, let's go on to the next portion of his supplement list.
I take vitamin D. I'm sorry that I'm blanking on the brand. I can see the bottle, but I'm blanking on the brand. I take 5,000 IU of vitamin D. Why? Largely because this is one of those things where I think the risk is insanely low. I think this is really a tricycle, and I'm not sure what I'm picking up. I think it's more than a penny. I definitely think it's less than a gold coin. It might be, a $5 bill, but I'd pick up if I was walking down the street and there was a kid riding a tricycle towards me and I saw a $5 bill, I would pick it up. I think that most of the studies on vitamin D have been very poorly done. And we do need to do a podcast on this. Maybe this is something we could deep dive onto in an AMA. So I won't get into it more now, but having looked very critically at the vitamin D literature, which is insanely underwhelming, I think it is almost assuredly the result of very lousy studies that add no value to our understanding of the problem. So the dosing has been wrong, the duration has been wrong, the compliance has been wrong, and the targeting has been wrong. So everything has been blown. And so I would say we truly have no idea.
Quite a bit have been said there.
Yep.
Maybe we can start off with what's the benefit of taking vitamin D?
Yeah. So I think most people know, and that's sort of one of the key reasons that people generally talk about vitamin D is that it helps improve calcium absorption. And so sort of traditionally, the idea of vitamin D, calcium, and bone mineral density has been well established. And that's what most people would think. But vitamin D, we have to remember, it's a potent hormone. And so it plays hundreds of different roles in the body. And we know that it's involved in reducing cancer cell growth. It helps control infections. So people take it or need it for immune function. It reduces inflammation. It really does have many, many roles.
And once again, the same question, how long does it take for you to see some results? And how do you test if you have enough vitamin D?
Yeah, so most people aren't going to know subjectively if they have a vitamin D deficiency. It's one of these things, again, fortunately, these early ones that we're talking about are ones that you can test. So here in Singapore, it's very easy to know your vitamin D status because you can get a blood test for it. But again, if we think and look about Singaporeans, again, my numbers aren't right, but about 30% of Singaporeans, working Singaporeans, have outright vitamin D deficiency, despite the fact that we live on the equator and have access to very strong sun exposure.
And on the other spectrum, what is the recommended daily allowance?
So in Singapore, the allowance is 100 international units per day, compared to America, for example, which is 600. But that's because we're on the equator and direction of sun and angle of sun is there. And that, of course, the best source of vitamin D is through sun exposure.
If we compare it to Dr. Attia's supplement list, how much he's taking, he consumes 5,000 IU. What do you think might be the reason he consumes more than the recommended amount?
It goes back to what he said at the beginning, the risk versus the reward and the toxicity of vitamin D if he was taking too much. You need to be taking very high doses for it to become an issue. So he feels very safe at the dosage that he takes. But also he is taking his vitamin D to a dose and to something that's measurable. We know that if you have a vitamin D level of less than 30 nanograms per liter, I think it is, deciliter, that's considered full deficiency and needs to be addressed. Anything from 50 and above is considered replete and that you don't need to supplement. Some people want to supplement higher than that. So he would be taking that dose based on needs greater than 50, I would imagine.
Now he mentions, like you said, that there's not plenty of risk there if he takes over the recommended allowance. But it does sound like there's still some risks involved. What are some of these risks?
Yep. So anything sub 10,000 international units is considered to be non-toxic. And at very high doses, there's issue of something called hypercalcemia. And this is where calcium ends up binding to tissues such as your kidneys, etc., and causing damage. So there is a point at which it can be quite high and can cause problems. But we're talking at 10,000 international units daily is a high dose.
And how do you go about choosing which one is for you?
Again, so you measure. You can get your vitamin D from sun exposure, you can get vitamin D from foods, you can get vitamin D from supplementation, and all three, but it's measurable. So know your numbers. And then as a rough rule of thumb, for every 1,000 international units that you take, you should be able to see a rise of 10 nanograms per litre or deciliter on a blood test result weeks down the track. But it does take time.
One thing he did mention, but something brought to our attention, is that vitamin D and K seem to work synergistically.
Yeah.
Are there any reasons not to take them together?
Yeah. So having a look that, the theory is that in the absence of K2, calcium that's circulating in the body, that's been absorbed from food, with the aid of vitamin D, can also be deposited into soft tissues of the body and the arteries, leading to atherosclerosis. That's the theory. So yes, they do work as a team. And I had a look, and there are some lines of evidence to suggest that vitamin D supplementation on its own is not optimal. But this isn't cast in stone. And that vitamin K deficiency is linked to blood vessel calcification. So having it and having the D may have a positive impact, but I don't think the science is super strong.
On that point, he did go on for a while stating about the science in vitamin D being not strong or more work needs to be done. What's your take on the current evidence, whether it's accurate enough to determine how much vitamin D we should use as limit?
Well, I think that we can work on the minimums to begin with. At least getting yourself up to a point where you are no longer clinically deficient would be a good starting point. And it doesn't have to be done super quickly. So start with an arbitrary dose, 1,000 international units. I think the upper limits for Singapore are 2,000 international units. And then you retest and see the rate of gain and at what point you've reached an equilibrium.
Okay, that's all the question I have on vitamin D. Let's move on to magnesium.
I take SlowMag, that is a brand, and I take 2 or 3 of those every day. So that is a slowly and completely absorbed form of magnesium. All in all, I'm trying to get up to about a gram of total magnesium or elemental magnesium in my system a day. And I get that through SlowMag, through magnesium L-threonate, and through magnesium oxide. So I take all of those things.
Okay, now the question, what are the benefits of taking magnesium?
So he takes a lot of magnesium, but again, for the reasons that he might take it might be different for why somebody else might take it. And my gather would be is that we know that he does a lot of exercise. And so one reason that he might be needing and wanting to take more magnesium is for the benefit of magnesium with exercise. And we know that it plays a role in bringing carbohydrates into muscle. We know that it also plays a role in lactate turnover. And so he may be looking at it from that perspective. We don't know what his diet is like, but we also know that even though magnesium is so abundant, at least in the American population, about 50% of Americans are magnesium deficient. So it could be just the baseline diet itself. He also mentioned that he takes different types of magnesium, and so he's probably doing it for perhaps bowel reasons as well, because we know that certain types of magnesium oxide, is a osmotic laxative. So he could be doing it for bowel function, and then we can talk about it more in a moment, but he also takes magnesium threonate, and that's likely to be for brain and anxiety, sleep, stress, possibly even memory.
Just for context reasons, I think we should state that according to what we found, the recommended daily allowance for healthy American adults is about 420 milligrams for males and 320 mg for females. And Peter consumes up to 1 gram per day. Correct.
Yep. But you need to be careful. So taking too much magnesium oxide can give real gastrointestinal issues. When people take magnesium dosing, you do need to do it slowly and steadily because you can actually end up feeling quite uncomfortable.
And is feeling uncomfortable the mark that you should be aware of to say that I'm taking too much?
Well, at least for magnesium oxide, yes. But you're probably not going to know whether you're magnesium deficient if you are taking the magnesium to downplay muscle cramp or to improve recovery from exercise. Then it's somewhat subjective because you'll say, I have less cramps. And if you're taking it for a brain perspective, and I don't know if we'll talk about magnesium threonate in a moment, then it would be a subjective measure that you're sleeping better or you have less anxiety. So I think that's the way you will know, but you're not going to know whether you've overdone it other than from the magnesium oxide or gastrointestinal aspect.
Oh, that's definitely knowledge that you kind of need to know before you take it, right? Let's move on to the next supplement on this list.
I take methylfolate and methyl B12. I use Jarrow as a brand. Again, here we do have biomarkers. You can measure B12 levels, but more than anything, I'm measuring homocysteine levels. That's why I'm taking methylated versions of those. And basically, I take these to keep homocysteine below 9. And that for me just means just taking one a day. So I take the standard dose of that. They do make it in 2 strengths, and I take the lower of the 2. In part because most of us have sort of variants of MTHFR. The variants I have are reasonable at methylation.
Quite a bit you have to cover in this segment. To start off, what's the benefit of taking methylfolate and B12?
Right, so methylfolate is vitamin B9, B12 is B12. So in his context, he's talking about it almost exclusively from a cardiovascular risk perspective and the role of folate in breaking down homocysteine and the links between high homocysteine and atherosclerosis and cardiovascular risk. So he's doing it from that perspective because folate is very important in the breakdown of it. And then he also mentions certain gene variants. So there are some different single nucleotide polymorphisms and gene variants that people have that will dispose them to being able to break folate down appropriately or not. And if you have a particular gene variant, then you need methylfolate to be able to do that successfully. So he does it from that front, and then he has his optimal homocysteine value of 9 that he's working towards. Again, that's probably an arbitrary number, and again, I can see from various research that he has done, or that has been done, is that even homocysteine levels as low as 6, they've shown can have impacts on cardiovascular risk. Many people's homocysteine is significantly higher than that, and I think he's opted for 9. But that's just one place where B12 and B9 are important. They're also really important in the production of red blood cells, macrocytic anemia, etc. And again, both of these water-soluble vitamins play lots of different roles in lots of different metabolic processes.
Is there a need to supplement both of these vitamins?
So technically, no, they're water-soluble vitamins, and many people and most people should be able to get folate and B12 from their diet. But again, caveats to being vegetarian or vegan, and B12 in particular. A very savvy vegetarian or vegan should be able to get their B12 through fortified products, but they may need to take B12 as a supplement. Some non-plant eaters, particularly if they don't have a particularly good diet, can actually have quite low folate. Many don't have a B12 problem, but if you have that gene variant, then you need to know that, and then that gives you a reason to need to supplement.
And while you're explaining, and in his video as well, the word homocysteine levels come up a couple of times.
Yeah.
For those that are not familiar with this term, can you just explain a little bit?
So homocysteine is again a breakdown product that finds its way into the bloodstream, and as a molecule itself can cause actual physical shearing and damage to linings of arteries. So it's a product that we want broken down to other things. And that's why having a higher circulating level of homocysteine is linked to cardiovascular risk.
And the other term he mentions, what does that mean?
So the MTFHR is a gene variant which We have different variants, and you can find that out by doing a gene test. And if you have a certain combination of those, then you're at a disadvantage of being able to break down folate, which means you need the methylfolate version, which is why he comes back to saying he takes methylfolate.
I see.
And you can find out that gene test. It can't be done through medical avenues, but it can be identified from people who've already done gene analyses or from allied health providers.
Cool. Good to know. Is there anything else you want to add to this segment?
On B12? And no.
Now let's move on to the next one, B6.
Yeah.
This is actually an interesting change. I used to take 50 milligrams of B6 daily. I've now lowered that to 3 times a week. We have seen some people who, when they take too much B6, can actually develop a sort of neuropathy as a result of it. Though I've never experienced any symptoms from it, a little further digging has led me to realize we don't need nearly as much B6 as I thought we did. So I've lowered that to 50 milligrams 3 times a week. And it helps with the homocysteine. You just have to be careful that you're not overdoing it.
To start off this B6 conversation, he mentioned neuropathy. What is that?
Yeah, so a neuropathy is a blanket term for lots of different conditions that involve damage to the peripheral nervous system, which is that communication network that sends signals between your central nervous system and different parts of the body. So how you know that one of the symptoms or some of the symptoms that are linked to neuropathy is when people talk about having tingling, burning, shooting pain, loss of balance, muscle weakness, for example. And we now know that higher intakes of B6 have been linked to this type of neuropathy.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask as well, what does the current evidence say about B6-induced neuropathy? Can you shed us a little bit more light on that?
So what I found was that it was back in the 1980s, actually, that these case reports of sensory neuropathy came into play. And then they were looking to see how much, I think they identified it back to B6 and how much B6 you needed for this to occur. And I think that they started to find that it was actually even in quite low dosing of B6 that people were experiencing this neuropathy. And I think that was perhaps the data that he's talking about, that he dug up. And if you think, people often take lots of different supplements and take lots of B supplements. And if you're taking 2 or 3 different products, you might quite easily get to a point where you're taking quite a high amount of B6 and thinking that it's harmless.
And so why do you need B6? What are some benefits of taking B6?
So B6, again, it's an essential vitamin, and most of the water-soluble B vitamins play lots of roles, particularly in energy metabolism.
And the recommended daily allowance for this?
I think it's 1.5 to 1.8 milligrams per day is the actual RDA.
Yeah, one of the questions we had was, why is he taking so much?
Yeah, and so, I think he's brought his amount down.
Yeah.
But again, it's why do people supplement with it? Depression, anxiety, cancer, cognitive function, cardiovascular disease, anemia. So these are all of the reasons why people might go about taking something like that. No doubt within that, there's things in his portfolio of health concerns that he feels warranting his 50 milligrams 3 times a week, which is significantly less than the upper limits of 100 milligrams per day that I was saying before.
Yeah.
So he's actually not taking very much.
Definitely. I think at this point it's good to say that it's important to customize your own supplement list. Yeah, it's important to look at what you need in terms of your own health, and you shouldn't just copy straight Peter's list just because he's Dr. Peter Attia.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, now let's move on to the next supplement.
I take a baby aspirin a day. I think the evidence for the use of baby aspirin in cardio protection is pretty weak. This is kind of a soft call. I don't think there's an evidence-based reason why I should take a baby aspirin. And there's even some evidence to suggest that once you get significantly older, unless your risk of cardiovascular disease is significantly high, the benefits of it, which are clear. There's no doubt there are benefits of a baby aspirin, but they're outweighed by the bleeding risks that are associated with aspirin use. In particular, if you fall and hit your head, that becomes a bigger liability. This is one of those things that baby aspirin use falls in and out of favor over time. Given that I am very young, relatively speaking, to these study populations and not really at risk for a bleeding injury, I think of this as picking up $1 or $2 in front of a tricycle at this point. But again, I'm always happy to reevaluate the use of this and any supplement for that matter in the presence of new data.
So he does mention that the evidence base for taking baby aspirin in cardioprotection is quite weak. Why do you think he's exactly taking it?
I think, again, I don't know the man, but it seems almost like this one's one of his legacy supplements, is that he reviews what he takes fairly frequently and he's already sitting on the fence on that one. Because he actually said himself he kind of doesn't need it based on the fact that he's not old and he has low cardiovascular risk, so that there really isn't much need for him. But then that sort of benefit harm analysis that he's given to himself is that risks are very low. So I don't think that he's believing, or again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, that it's one of his major drivers for protecting him from cardiovascular risk, but he thinks it's safe.
What are the benefits versus the risk of taking baby aspirin?
I think he mentions in there that there is data, but chops and changes, that people who are at higher risk of cardiovascular disease can benefit from the blood thinning effects of the aspirin or the baby aspirin. But then there is that bleeding risk, and it's weighing the benefit and risk between those two things.
And now if you can just break down for us, what's the difference between aspirin and baby aspirin?
Dose. Yep. So I think that, again, maybe these are American numbers, but baby aspirin, I think, is sort of considered around the 80 milligram amount, and that a regular aspirin is about 300 or 325 milligrams. So it's a lower dose, but I think the studies are showing that you're getting kind of an even amount of benefit from the lower dose versus the higher, or that the higher dose isn't significantly more beneficial. But for some strange reason, people seem to have more compliancy towards taking a baby aspirin than a regular aspirin.
Now, this is new to me, so it might sound like a dumb question, but is it something available across the counter?
It is. So it's across the counter, and this is something that people need to think about, because that means people then take it without prescription, but you really should be talking to your doctor and making the decision based on everything that you know about your health as to whether you should or shouldn't be taking it. And if you are taking it and you haven't told your doctor, you do need to tell your doctor that you're taking it.
Even if they talk to a dietitian, does it make up for talking to a doctor? But is there still a difference?
No, your doctor needs to know if you're taking consistently a baby aspirin or a regular aspirin.
Cool. Now let's move on to his supplement cabinet.
Yep.
You know, it's just I'm like physically trying to picture my medicine cabinet. I'm going through daytime first because I know it. I can remember the night ones are easier. That might be it for daytime supplements. In the night, I take ashwagandha. I take 600 milligrams of ashwagandha. I recently switched to the Solgar brand. I take 2 grams of glycine. I use the Thorn brand. I take magnesium L-threonate, which I just mentioned. I use the Magtine brand. By the way, anytime you're buying magnesium L-threonate, just make sure it has Magtine in it. So you could buy it from any different company, but they have to have the Magtine proprietary combination because they're the only people that have the license to make L-threonate. I feel like there's one other thing I take. Occasionally, for travel, I will take Jarrow's phosphatidylserine. It comes in 100 milligram capsules or gel caps. For some reason, I like the gel caps better. No idea if they're just more quickly absorbed. I truly have no idea. If I'm really, going to the trouble of taking it, I'm presumably on a long flight where I'm trying to overcome a significant time zone. So I usually take about 400 milligrams That's a compound that's been tested readily up to 600 milligrams. It's possible I'm forgetting something else, but I think those are my supplements. Oh, I mean, sorry, there's 2 others I take, but they're not in the cabinet, and that's why.
Okay. I think before we go on to the supplements, just talk about, is there a difference between daytime and nighttime taking of supplements?
There are. And so if we think about, first of all, why you might take supplements in the first case, you've got 13 vitamins that we need. 9 of them are water-based, 4 of them are fat-based. And so if you're going to be taking supplementation that is fat-soluble ones, you're going to need some food with it. And at night, if you're taking supplements, there's no eating, there's no diet. So if you're taking fat-soluble vitamins, the vitamin Ds, the fish oils, etc., then you need them with food, so then you need them through the day. And then the water-soluble vitamins, as we've said, many of them they're water-soluble, so they technically don't need food with them. Your body needs them as they go because you'll excrete it as not required. And a lot of the B vitamins are likely to be used in metabolic reactions, particularly involved with energy and energy production, which is moving and doing things through the day. So there's sort of an argument towards why you would take them through the course of the day rather than the evening. And then a lot of the supplements, all the supplements that he's discussed for night, are nearly all related to improving sleep and sleep quality.
If we were to take some of the supplements that he take, I know we shouldn't copy-paste the supplements he takes, but if we take what he takes, can we copy-paste if he takes in the morning, we take in the morning? Does it make sense?
That would make sense, yeah. If you were taking them for the same reasons he was taking them.
Cool. And if we go down the list, there will be fish oil, vitamin D, magnesium, methylfolate and methyl, vitamin B6 and baby aspirin in the morning.
That's right. The interesting one on the aspirin, again, check with your doctor first, is that I saw some data that coronary events tend to happen earlier in the morning. So having the blood thinning property of the aspirin earlier in the day might be a benefit. So again, don't trust me on that one, but that was some data that I had read.
Good to know. We'll check that out.
Yeah.
Right. For night supplements, he did mention he takes ashwagandha, glycine, and this one I probably need some help with pronouncing.
Phosphatidylserine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. What are the benefits of taking this?
The phosphatidylserine. So he mentions, well, we'll talk about that, but he mentions phosphatidylserine that he said when he tends to travel or when things are disrupted. So phosphatidylserine may play a role in reducing cortisol levels, and again, having abnormal cortisol levels in and around nighttime will impact your ability to fall asleep, stay asleep. So he's trying to take it to help modulate that. And I think, when he's traveling or when people are traveling, or if you're highly stressed or haven't had appropriate wind down time, he's suggesting, or he personally takes that one.
Is it something, again, over the counter or?
That's over the counter, yeah.
And is it recommended that you speak to your doctor before taking this?
You should, but I wouldn't be surprised if many of the doctors have no idea what you're talking about. If you go to a local pharmacy, you're not going to find phosphatidylserine here in Singapore.
I see.
Yep.
And how about glycine and ashwagandha? Can we go through some of the benefits?
So ashwagandha, again, it's that sort of the whole idea of it as a calmative. So it might reduce cortisol. There is an axis, which is called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. We know that it's part of our stress response system. We know that, or there's data to suggest that ashwagandha has an impact on that system. So it's the sort of link between perceived stress and physiological stress. So taking ashwagandha is kind of a modulator of these things. Again, I don't think the evidence is super strong, but there is some evidence. Lots of big words to say that it might have a anti-anxiety calming effect. I think that it also has impact on a different thing called the GABAergic and also the serotonergic activity centers. Similar thing, acting on the network of neurons in the brain that help regulate balance of stress. Glycine, Again, there's actually some recent meta-analyses on glycine and sleep that were done quite recently, actually. So there's some building data on the evidence of glycine and sleep. So it's kind of come up a notch, which I think is good. But again, an inhibitory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system, facilitating relaxation and stress reduction.
The meta-analysis, we'll be sure to put that in the show notes. That's something I probably am interested in reading myself.
Yeah, it's only just been released, so it might not even see it on PubMed, but it was a recent meta-analysis by last author of Professor Andrea Meyer, again, key longevity medicine specialist here in Singapore.
Moving on, what are the recommended allowance for these supplements?
These are all, none of these would have recommended amounts. So these are, you're on your own on this front as to what your dose can and should be. You can look at clinical trials where they've used them. I can give you rough numbers, but the 2 grams of glycine per day, I've seen other evidence on 1 gram of glycine per day taken 60 minutes or so before sleep. Phosphatidylserine, 100, 200 milligrams. Magnesium threonate, 100, 200 milligrams. We didn't talk about magnesium threonate, but again, it comes back to magnesium, but magnesium doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier well, if at all, unless it's coupled with threonate. So that's why we have that. And there were clinical trials done back in 2010 where they looked to see certain new compounds, magnesium threonate, finding its way to the blood, and that was the Magtine product. And so the reason why Attia talks about using Magtine is because that's where the clinical trials come from, and it's the only one that's validated.
So for that, he specifically mentions that he recommends people to buy that Magtine proprietary blend since they're the only ones with license to do so. Is that the case in Singapore? So
it's the same. You're not going to find these products in your local pharmacy. These are all things that people will be ordering themselves. And then in the blend, you'll see Magtine.
And last but not least, is there a reason to consume these supplements at night and not in the day that have not been mentioned?
So most of those supplements are, at least under his context, are taken to as a calmative to help with sleep. Some of those supplements have other uses, and some people, there's clinical trials suggesting that they might improve memory, for example. So there might be cause to take it for different reasons through the day, but his were predominantly for sleep.
Now let's move on to the last part of this video.
So I take Athletic Greens in the morning. Disclosure, I am an investor in that company. I'm also an advisor to that company. So I take AG1 as a green drink in the morning, and I take a probiotic called glucose. I think it's called Glucose Control by a company called Pendulum. So I take 2 of those in the morning with my AG. That's kind of like the first thing I consume in the morning.
With those, just on the whole, just because you take them, not everyone should take them, and you're looking at your medical history, what % of that, the same supplements in the same doses, were you taking a year ago? Kind of the question I'm kind of getting at is
how
often
is this
does
changing?
that Yeah, so that way if someone listening to this down the road hears it,
Yep.
they don't automatically just go do the same thing.
Yeah, so a year ago, I was not taking the Pendulum probiotic. That's something I've only been taking for a couple of months. And I'm doing an experiment there, which is looking at average blood glucose. So the reason I'm taking this particular probiotic is I believe, having looked at all of these probiotics, I think this is the most rigorously tested and validated probiotic out there. And in a small but double-blinded randomized clinical trial, it demonstrated a 0.6%, meaning 0.6 absolute percentage point reduction in hemoglobin A1C in people with type 2 diabetes. And that was only in 90 days, which is pretty interesting. It also demonstrated and caused about a 30% reduction in postprandial glucose AUC, area under the curve. So meaning when you gave people a glucose challenge and then measured and plotted a graph of their glucose response and looked at the area under that curve, the people who had been taking this Pendulum glucose control probiotic had a 30% reduction in that, meaning they had become more insulin sensitive. And I'm a couple of weeks away from doing a blood test on myself to see if I've had any improvement in glycemic markers in response to that. So was not taking that a year ago. I was not taking ashwagandha a year ago. I had taken it a long time earlier, but just kind of came back to it, probably found a slightly more potent version of it. I was taking a different brand of fish oil before. I had used Carlson's in the past, had switched to Nordic Naturals. Now I've switched back to this. I find it to be just a slightly more robust product. The Nordic Naturals ones, for some reason, every third bottle had a broken capsule in it. And once a capsule breaks in the bottle, it just totally destroys the remaining of the capsules. It was just happening too frequently. I was kind of aggravated by it. I don't think I was taking a baby aspirin a year ago. I think, again, that's something I've kind of done on and off over periods of time, and probably the same with vitamin D. It's possible I wasn't taking vitamin D a year ago.
Yeah, so it's not only the drugs have changed, but even like the B6 you mentioned, the dosing has also changed.
Right.
Okay, we have come to the end of this video. Let's go through the last part of questions that I have and our reaction to it. In terms of athletic greens, I think I'm doing a comprehensive review on that. You are doing your own review on that, right? Finding out what you really think about the product. So we'll just let it be for now.
Park that one.
Yeah, we'll park that one. We'll talk about probiotic, right? He mentioned that a year ago he wasn't taking it. What are your thoughts on his experiment on Pendulum?
So I think, again, not putting words in his mouth, I think that he has a disposition towards insulin resistance. I think he's mentioned it in the past. So obviously it's something that's very close to his heart, and that something has come across his eye, whether it was that clinical trial that he was talking about, seeing the reduction of HbA1c at a significant amount from taking this probiotic. So I think he's just doing a personal experiment on himself. And we know that he likes to do that. And so no doubt he'd have a fairly strict protocol. He's likely wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and it's data that he will track.
Now, on that point, and this is probably a preview for some video in the future.
Yeah.
How often should you go through your supplement list and say, I should revise this?
Well, I think he said he's sort of, it's always evolving and changing. So rather than just taking something and having a set and forget policy to it, is to know that everything is in a flux, and what evidence that might present itself now changes, and to be prepared to not be stuck with any one philosophy.
And so with that, is there a specific period where it's good for people to check, like maybe once every 3 months, every 6 months, or it's something that you should look out for indicators that you should check ad hoc as you go along?
I think, well, some of them will be obvious, because if you're having regular blood tests and blood screens, you're going to see data.
Yeah.
So you'll see your vitamin D, B12, folate, iron, etc., homocysteine levels. So you'll get feedback from that front. And then it will be to the extent that your listeners are looking at research articles, listening to peer-reviewed podcasts, etc., and then making decisions on that front.
With that, we round off this episode. If anyone were to like to find out more from you, where would you guide them to?
You can find me at Chi Tree Health, and you can also find me at Chi Longevity at Camden Medical.
Cool. That's all I have for now. That's all we have for now. Till next time. Take care.